What is up, y'all, and welcome back to the Open Your Own Door podcast. I'm your host, Paige Espey. I'm really excited to dive into episode number 2. Episode number 1 was all about my story, my life. It was just a list of events that have happened over the course of my 33 years that I feel like are really important for you all to understand as my audience, for you to fully understand why I am here, why I think it's important to start a show, why I think it's important to get on this microphone and encourage you. And I'm obviously someone, I've been through some ups and downs in my life, and they've taught me, like, at each and every, I guess, moment of adversity has taught me something. And at the end of episode number 1, if you haven't listened to it, you should go back and listen to it because it'll just help you understand me better. So at the end of episode number 1, I had kind of gotten to the point in my life where my brother died. And so my brother died in 2018, and I didn't cover all of that in the first episode because I feel like this life event, honestly, it deserves its own moment. It deserves its own episode because my brother Will, he passed away when he was 33, and him passing away was literally the pivotal moment of my life, of my career, of everything I stand for today. I feel like started the day that he died. And so I really feel strongly about the fact that this should be its own episode. It deserves its own moment. So I'm going to kind of tell that story today and tell the lessons I've learned from it, and, kind of how it has shaped my business and why I am sitting here in this chair talking to you all today. So I feel like the number one lesson that I've learned from him dying was just, it's truly why I'm so passionate about kicking approval to the curb and trying to work through feelings of unworthiness in order to achieve the goals that you have in your life and in order to do the things in your life that you actually want to do. Because, y'all, my brother was 33 when he died, okay? That is so young. I am 33 right now, okay? I mean, I know I'm not like a spring chicken, but 33 is so young. And so when he died, I just was like, you know what? Life is short. I could die today. I could die tomorrow. Why am I sitting here living my life just to make other people happy? And why am I making very large life decisions based off of what other people want from me and what other people expect of me? And so essentially that is where, like, the title of this podcast comes from, Open Your Own Door. That is where my entire message comes from. Kicking to the curb the feelings of unworthiness and kicking to the curb the feelings of needing to prove yourself all the time. Again, it's something that I'm working through day in and day out, but September 2nd, 2018 is where all of this started. And also, I can touch on this in a minute, but the very first day that I recorded anything for this podcast was on September 2nd, 2025. And a rainbow appeared on the day that I started recording this. And, as I'm recording this specific episode right now, it is September 9th. So this is my 3rd time sitting down to record. And y'all, I am still getting used to the feeling of talking on camera, seeing myself, using this microphone, editing. So, I'm sure things will get better down the line with this whole production. And also, I promise, not every single episode will be as long as the first episode was. The first episode was an hour and 45 minutes long. And there was just so much that I had to cover and so much that I needed to share with you all. And, not every episode is going to be that long. I pinky promise. Anyways, with that being said, I'm going to go on and get started. So back to what I was saying. My brother passed away on Labor Day weekend of 2018. So he was a football coach for Spring Hill High School. And obviously September 2nd, Labor Day weekend, that is a very busy time period for football coaches. And he was a football coach. And in the weeks leading up to him passing away, he wasn't married, he lived by himself. In the weeks leading up to him passing away, he had some pain in his calf. And he was also like overweight. He had been visiting the cardiologist and they essentially told him like, you gotta lose some weight. So he had recently lost about 10 pounds and he was walking. He was trying to drink more water, take care of himself, all the things. And he had a pain in his calf and he did not get it looked at essentially because it was football season. He was busy. He was a coach. He just kind of put it on the back burner and he didn't get it looked at. So on the Sunday morning of Labor Day weekend, he woke up and he actually called 911 on himself. I have never actually listened to the 911 call, and I don't know if you've listened to episode number 1, but he's my half brother. So we have the same dad, but not the same mom. And we share a sister. So Lindsay and Will is my brother's name. Will is also my husband's name. So it's a little bit confusing, but Will and Lindsay they have the same mom and dad, but me and Will, I only have the same dad as them. Okay, sorry. Just to make sure everyone is on the same page about my really confusing family. So I have never listened to the 911 call because that's not my vibe. That's not something that I want to do. But apparently he called on himself and he was saying, I cannot breathe. I feel like I have an elephant sitting on my chest. And so the EMTs, obviously ambulance came. When EMTs got there, they realized, oh, this dude's young. And so they asked him, do you think you can come unlock the door? Because the door was locked. And he was like, yeah, I think I can come unlock the door. So he stands up to walk to the door to unlock it and he collapsed. And so ultimately he ended up passing away of a pulmonary embolism. And I will get more into that later, just blood clotting issues in my family and knowing the signs and symptoms of a blood clot and just all that stuff. I will get into that whenever I get to the point where I talk about my pregnancy. I'm in my I'm 32 weeks pregnant right now and with my third baby, and I'm having some blood clotting issues. So again, that's something that I'll touch on in a little while. But anyway, so that happened. And when I tell you that my brother, I just want to talk to you all about the type of person that my brother was and just his personality, because he was the best, y'all. I don't know really how to describe him or put his personality into words, but he was the best. He was wonderful with kids. He was sort of like my sibling. He just understood me. He just got me. And we like to listen to the same type of music. He wasn't necessarily as quote unquote artsy as me, but he kind of was in his own little way. And he also, all of his friends called him the counselor, as a joke, because he always was trying to help people. He was always trying to help people through trials and tribulations and give them advice. And that's a lot of what I do today. And so, I don't know, I feel like I can see myself in him a lot. And I was always his pride and joy. I was always his baby sister that he loved so much and adored so much. He was also super protective of me. And he just, I don't know, he was the best. He was the sibling that whenever I said, hey, I'm going to move to Austin, Texas after college, I don't really have a job, I don't have a plan. He's like, good, go for it. You shouldn't have a job. You shouldn't have a plan. Please go. I'm so proud of you. Let me know if you need anything. I will contact some people down in Texas that are my friends and you can call on them anytime you need something. That was his personality. Also, when I told him that I was going to go on a mission trip to Uganda, he was like, great, you should do that. Here's $300, towards your fundraising. He never questioned me whenever I had what felt like to me an off the wall idea or an off the wall plan for my life or, something different than what other people were doing. He never made me feel some type of way about it. You know what I mean? He never would make me question things. He would always support me. That was just the type of person that he was. And so whenever he died, it was so crazy. We saw probably 15 rainbows in the month that he passed away. So, I'll never forget it. My grandmother called, sorry, I'm just trying to recap and replay all this stuff in my mind. And it's honestly not something that I like to replay and that I like to recap, but when it happened, it was Sunday morning of Labor Day weekend, and my grandmother essentially called me to tell me, like, your brother has had a heart attack of some sort. He's being rushed to the hospital. It's not looking great, but I'll keep you updated. And then within 30 minutes, my cousin was actually the one to call me to tell me that he didn't make it. And in that moment, I was, I just, like, you have those moments that, again, you don't want to replay in your mind, but you do replay them in your mind a lot because it's that impactful. And so, like, when my cousin called me to tell me that information, it was jarring. It was completely heartbreaking. And so in the planning of his funeral and everything, it was so hard because it did not feel, if you've ever lost anyone, you're kind of stuck in that, like, muddy, messy, just, you don't really know how to feel because you're still trying, like, the news flashes up on the screen and says, like, 33-year-old football coach dies, and you're like, what? Like, you're still trying to process that's your brother. It just still doesn't feel real. Like, it doesn't feel real enough for it to be on the TV, and for your preacher to be calling you to ask you what songs you want in the funeral. Like, you are still in the process of even trying to believe that it's real, that, like, you cannot even, it's just hard to make decisions. It's hard to focus on anything. And I can remember in the planning of his funeral, like, so many people in my family, were wanting to put, like, old school traditional hymnals in his funeral, and, like, just all this stuff that was just so not him. And I ended up putting my foot down at one point, and I was like, no, like, we are not playing the songs at his funeral. We are going to play the songs that he liked to listen to. We are going to make this feel like it's a celebration of him, and it actually is remembering him and not just some thrown together traditional funeral. You know what I mean? And so one of the songs, so we all kind of went around and, like, people in our family chose songs. And, like, I think his mom chose Simple Man. And the song that I chose was Where Rainbows Never Die by the Steel Drivers, because the Steel Drivers and Chris Stapleton, like, that was our vibe. That was mine and my brother's vibe. That was the stuff that we liked to listen to. And it was so funny, like, in the years leading up to him passing away, was kind of whenever I was figuring out that I liked that type of music. And I can remember, like, being on the lake with him and me playing certain songs and him saying, when did you start listening to cool music? Like, when did you get cool? When did you, but the Steel Drivers, like, we always would sing at the top of our lungs to the Steel Drivers. And he had, right before he died, he was really starting to get into, like, Whiskey Myers and, like, Turnpike Troubadours, which is, like, all the type of music that I like to listen to. And so when it was my turn to choose a song, I chose Where Rainbows Never Die by the Steel Drivers. And so Rainbows just really became sort of like this thing. I don't know how to describe it. Also at his funeral, when they also played Friendship by Chris Stapleton. And just at his funeral, when they were playing these songs, I don't know how to describe it, but I wasn't bawling my eyes out. I was, like, singing along, and I was right there. I felt like he was right there beside me, like, singing the songs with me. And, and it almost felt like more like a celebration of his life, instead of just this. Trust me, it was an awful day, but, like, in those moments where we were playing those songs, I felt so close to him. And so when we went to the gravesite, it actually started raining. And bless my brother-in-law and my husband and a bunch of the other guys in our family, this part kind of makes me cry, but, like, they very much said, we are not going to have him buried with a machine. We're not going to have, well, I don't know what it's called, like a track hoe, or I don't know the proper terms, but we're not going to have some machine come out here and dig his grave. And so all the guys, like, in our family and my husband, they stayed out there and they dug his grave in the rain, and they released doves. It was just a really beautiful ceremony. So after the funeral, we were headed back to the funeral home, to collect all the gifts and all the things that you get when somebody dies. And we turn the corner and there's this huge rainbow. Like, the most vivid, beautiful rainbow appeared over the funeral home. And I was like, oh my gosh, like where rainbows never die. Like, this is crazy. This is so crazy. And so, fast forward, in the month of September, we saw 15 rainbows. I counted. I think I kept track of them on my Instagram. And we saw 15 rainbows. He died on September 2nd, and we literally saw 15 rainbows in the month that he passed away. Like, it got to be so weird. Like, our family would have a group text, and we would be like, we saw another one, we saw another one, we saw another one. And so rainbows just really became like kind of our thing. And so over the next year, he just, sorry, I'm trying to remember everything and like touch on everything that I want to talk about. But rainbows would show up at the craziest times. They would show up like on his birthday or on my birthday. So like, my birthday is September 22nd. His birthday was September 26th. And like, I swear, like rainbows would show up on those days. And what I was mentioning earlier, on the day that I started recording this podcast on September 2nd, 2025, a rainbow appeared in the sky. And another weird example is on the 1-year anniversary of him passing away. I'm one of those people, when I'm going through something, like I kind of want to be able to grieve on my own. I don't want to be around a bunch of people. And I knew that if I would have stayed in Huntington on the 1-year anniversary, like if I would have stayed home on the 1-year anniversary of him passing away, I think it would have just put me in a really bad mood. Like I was not really wanting to like go to church with all of our family and have the flowers on the altar in memory of him, and then all of us go to lunch and like wear them out. Like I was not into that. And so on the 1-year anniversary of him passing away, I was like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go on a solo trip. I'm gonna go by myself, and I'm gonna go to like some states that I've never visited before. That's like something that I always say, that I want to visit all 50 states. And so Iowa and Nebraska, those were some states that I hadn't visited yet. And I was like, I'm gonna go, I'm just gonna pack up the car and go to Iowa and Nebraska. And I was literally in Des Moines, and I was like, I'm gonna get a tattoo. I'm gonna get a tattoo of a rainbow. And I'm just gonna remember, I'm gonna do a lot of journaling. I'm gonna do a lot of reading. I'm gonna do a lot of like self-reflection. And I wanna get a tattoo of a rainbow on my wrist. And so I call some random tattoo parlor, and I'm like, hey, will be a walk-in. Can you just do like 3 simple lines on my wrist? And they were like, yeah, that's fine. Like you can go on and come here now. So I type in the address on my GPS on my phone in Des Moines. So random. And as I'm driving to the tattoo place, what do you think appears in the sky? A rainbow. And I'm like, what in the world? This is crazy. Like this is so crazy. Yeah, and there's just so many wild stories surrounding. I actually wrote most of them down in a journal. So maybe one day I'll do an episode where I just tell every single one of those stories, because I mean it's really crazy. So another weird story was that like on the day that he died, my grandmother, she had a friend, like an older friend who had been in a coma. And he was in this coma, like he hadn't spoken for I think weeks. And on the morning that my brother died, around the same time that he died, which was like 8:45-ish in the morning. I'd have to go back. I'm not good with numbers. But my grandmother's friend, who had been in this coma, actually kind of woke up and said something along the lines of like, and said my grandmother's name. How is she doing? And then that was like one of the last things that this person said before they passed away. And so it just makes you wonder, like, did that person see my brother, like in passing, like, as they were passing on to the next life or into heaven, Again, these are all types of things that I'm still exploring and I have questions about, but either way, I think it's just really cool that something like that would happen. And another really wild thing, y'all, this is insane as well. So, like I said, my brother was a football coach, and the impact that he had on those kids, just, all the kids in his high school that were so upset when this tragic event happened, it really was just a testimony of like what kind of person he was and what kind of coach he was, and, just how much time and effort he poured into them. And so in the weeks after he passed away, they all decorated their lockers because everyone called my brother Coach Fish. So his name was Will Fisher, and everyone called him Coach Fish. And so they decorated the lockers with just like cutouts of fish hooks, all these things. Y'all, when my son was born in 2023, so my second son, when he was born in 2023, he has a birthmark. I am not kidding. And it's in the shape of a fish on his leg. It gives me chills when I think about it. And, all these things, I don't know what they mean. I don't know what they mean. I don't know if they're quote unquote signs from him. I don't know if it's signs from God. I don't know what it is. But you can't deny that it's cool. I mean, either way, it's neat. And yeah, it's just there's so many stories like that surrounding his death. And so those were the types of things that just kind of kept me going after he died. Like I feel like every single day something like some other sign or something crazy would pop up, and I'd be like, wow, like we are not in this alone, like whether it's him holding my hand through this grief or God holding my hand through this grief or angels or whatever you believe, it gave me a lot of peace during that time period. And it got me through. Like, if I'm being really honest, it got me through. But I will say so I took 2 weeks off of work. I was a speech pathologist at the time in a school system in Northwest Tennessee because, again, in the first episode, I mentioned my husband and we had gotten engaged in July of 2019. And we had gotten engaged in July of 2018, and my brother passed away in September of 2018. So, my brother never really got to see us much during our engagement. He didn't really get to see us much during our, I got off track there. He did not get to see us get married, all these things, but I do have text messages between my husband, Will, and my brother Will. And it's basically my husband Will asking my brother Will sort of for his hand, which, yes, my husband Will also asked my dad for his hand. But I think it was really important for him to get my brother's approval, and like just the things that he said to my brother and the things that my brother said back to him in those text exchanges. It's like, it's so sweet. Just my brother telling Will Espey, like, I believe in you. I think you're a good man. I think that you're a wonderful match for my sister. Just all those things that are just so near and dear to my heart now and today. But at the time, I worked as a speech pathologist in a school system, and I can remember going back to work and just everything. I took 2 weeks off, and going back to work, everything felt like mush. My brain was truly mushy, is the best way that I know how to describe it. I could not focus on anything. I couldn't get my work done. I can remember teachers coming up to me being like, hey, here's this piece of paper for this IEP meeting. Like, it's supposed to have your signature on it and doesn't have your signature on it. Like, just stuff like that. And I just was like, OMG, like, I can't do this. Like, I don't care. Like, I literally. So one thing that I noticed in this whole process of losing him is that, like, it really made me just notice what's important and what's not important. And one of the reasons that I didn't really like speech therapy was because I feel like everything was all about profit and productivity and paperwork and just seeing as many kids as you possibly can and just like checking a box and, just not really actually helping anyone. Like, it's so crazy. I feel like whether it was a company that I worked for or a school system that I worked for, every time we had like team meetings or like group meetings or whatever, the special ed district, whatever would meet, special ed department would meet, the meetings would never be about the kids. It would never be about, hey, how can we make progress with this one really hard child who has like apraxia? Like there were never meetings like that happening. The meetings that were so important that we always had, it was mandatory for us to attend, were like, hey, be sure that you're signing this piece of paper on this line with this blue pen, because if you don't, we'll get audited and blah, blah, blah. It was just such BS to me. Like so much red tape. And this kind of stuff is like a lot of the reason why people are leaving the public school system. And this is why a lot of people are like turning to homeschool. And I am not going to speak on that much right now because my kids probably will go to a public school. I mean, shoot, I have tossed around so many ideas and thoughts and like possibly homeschooling my children. And so I don't know. And I'm not saying I never will, but that's something that is kind of not, I'm not making that decision today. We will make that decision down the line. But when I worked in the school system, like this is the type of stuff that is so frustrating for educators, and it's so frustrating for people who actually care about the kids, because I felt like I was, and I didn't mean to turn this into like a, speech therapy breakdown or whatever, but I feel like I had 100+ kids on my caseload, and I would have to see like 9 kids in a group, and some kids might be working on language, like WH questions, sequencing, that kind of thing. But some kids who had to come with those kids because that's how their schedule and lunch and, extracurricular whatever times lined up with their schedule. Like some kids would be working on the R sound, some kids would be working on whatever. And I just felt like I could make no progress because of the way the system was set up. Do you get what I'm saying? And so to me, it all became like everything became about profit, productivity, and paperwork. And as somebody who is going through an extreme season of grief, I could pick up on the BS like so quickly. And I feel like that is something that is still true with me today. Like when I'm going through something that's difficult, it makes it so much easier for me to pick up on the things that I don't have the time or energy to tolerate. And I did not at the time, I just didn't have the time and the energy and like the fakeness about me to tolerate that system, because I didn't believe in it. I didn't trust in it. And so I can remember when I turned in my notice that I was not, so I didn't actually end up quote unquote like quitting my speech therapy job until probably a year after my brother died. But when I turned in my notice, I can remember my boss asking me like, why are you quitting? Like, can you just tell me why? And I wanted to be like, girl, how many hours in the day do you have? Like I could sit here and tell you a million reasons why, but we'll be here for the next 6 months. You know what I mean? Like I have a lot to say about it. And so anyways, but all that to say, when I went back to work, I just didn't have the time for it. I was just like, I don't have the will to put up with this any longer. And I also just got to a point where I was like, again, I could die today. I could die tomorrow. My brother was 33. I'm only 28. What is life? What are we doing? What are we doing? Like the most important thing I was doing all day was like signing the correct line with the correct color blue ink. I'm just like, what the heck is happening? What has my life come to, And that's not to say that, you can't find the silver lining in teaching, and you can't find the silver lining in working with kids. But I was just the type of person, I would rather pour into one child and really actually make an impact than to halfway see 100 kids, a week, pat them on the head and send them on and do the check mark in the box to show the state that you saw them. Like I got to a point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. And so I really feel like Will dying is what sent me over the edge with that. And because in all the years leading up to that, I just was staying in the job to keep my boss happy. I was staying in the job to keep my family happy. I was staying in the job because I felt like that's what I was supposed to do. And even though I had already had all these like interests in art, and I was already making watercolor cards and selling them, and I had started, making wedding invitations and selling those, and like I had kind of at this point I had kind of started popping up at some events selling my art. And so even though I had this like passion that was sort of brewing, I never felt like I could pursue that because I felt like speech pathology was the real job, right? Like that was the big girl job. That was the job that I had worked so hard to get, and so I just felt like I couldn't let that go until my brother died. And so, which is crazy because my brother was also a teacher. So sometimes I question myself. I'm like, is this what Will would have done? Like, would he would have quit being a speech pathologist? And, but honestly, on down the line, when I started finding Facebook groups online that were literally titled like how to stop being how to stop being an SLP, how to find a job when you figure out that you don't want to be an SLP anymore. Like there were actual Facebook groups for this type of thing. So then I didn't feel so alone, and I didn't feel so crazy, and I didn't feel so much like, oh, I'm tossing this degree out the window that I have worked so hard to achieve or whatever. But, I will say I did not just like take a huge leap. It wasn't ever a moment where I was like, oh, I'm quitting speech and I'm just going to pursue art from here on out. That's not how things went down. I do always tell people, if you have a passion or you have like a side project or whatever or a side hustle or a passion project, whatever that you're wanting to pursue, I don't necessarily always give you the advice to just go for it and take the leap without having any sort of plan or any sort of backup. So when I quit being a speech pathologist, I helped a family. It was like one family. And I agreed to be their homeschool teacher slash speech therapist slash this whole story is kind of crazy because I was sort of in that phase of like, I don't want to be a speech therapist anymore. I don't care if I lose my license. I don't care. Like, I just don't want to do this anymore. But I also didn't want to like get in trouble for like serving a family without insurance, just all that stuff, and getting in trouble for not being out of compliance or whatever the term is when you're a speech therapist. And so I was very careful with all of those logistics. But I essentially ended up being like a private homeschool teacher for this one family, and this family is so near and dear to my heart still today. And I actually still work on interior home projects for them, like at least once a year. They are so special to me, but they are the reason that I was able to transition out of speech, because they gave me a form of income while I was trying to build my art business and also while I was building Little Yellow Door. So that sort of leads me into, in the year that I was still a speech therapist, but my brother had died and I didn't want to be a speech therapist anymore. Like that was the year that I really was like, okay, if I'm not going to be an SLP anymore, what the heck am I going to do? How am I going to make money? Whatever. I still felt like I needed to bring some money to the table in our relationship because, again, we had just gotten married, like we got married in June of 2019. So like we had just gotten married. I wanted to still bring money to the table. I didn't just want to like quit and stay home or whatever. I didn't even have a baby yet to stay home with. And so it's like I'm not going to be a stay-at-home mom because I don't even have a baby to be a stay-at-home mom with. But I definitely don't want to do speech anymore. So this family, like I said, really gave me sort of like a cushion of income to work with. And also in April of 2019, or maybe it was like March, April of 2019, is when I started Little Yellow Door. And everybody always asks me that question. How did you start Little Yellow Door? How did you start your vintage reselling business? And my answer is my husband and I, we decided to buy this like really small, cute, adorable farmhouse that was on some land that my husband's family owns. If you missed episode 1, my husband is a farmer. And so like his family owns a lot of land and just random houses like in our county, in this area. And I can remember we were kind of looking for a house to live in, and my husband said, there's this old house, like, out on the highway. You probably won't like it. It's old. Nobody's lived there for a long time. And we go and visit it. And I was like, my Joanna Gaines radar went off, honey. It went off. Also, this was back in the day of like shiplap and all that. And I was like, this was back in the day of shiplap and all that. And I said, I want this house. Like, this house is ours. This house is ours. And it was a little two bedroom, 1 bath house. And so I went to town trying to source items for this home. And also that was kind of my therapy. So when I would get off of work as an SLP, I would get off at like 2:30, 3 o'clock as a speech therapist, and I would go to an antique store every single day after school, just sourcing and looking for furniture to furnish our house with. I was also coming off of living in Nashville for a year, and like I had seen, this was very much like the boho rattan, the peacock chairs, like this was very much that. And I was coming off of living in Nashville where I was seeing that all that stuff was selling for like sky high, like super expensive in Nashville. And I had just moved back to West Tennessee, and I was like, wait, all these little antique stores here are selling mid-century record players for $40. Like, I could buy this, and if I don't use it myself, like I could possibly resell this, right? So anyways, that was sort of my therapy. After my brother died, I started going into antique stores and just walking around for hours and hours and hours. Honestly, because I didn't want to go home and like, because my husband was at work, I didn't want to go home and just like sit by myself and like, cry my eyes out and be sad about my brother. And so I would like find things to do to keep me busy. So I would go to antique malls and I would just rack up on decor for our house. And then I can remember I ended up like getting so much stuff because again, this house was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. And when we finally moved in, I realized like, shoot, I've got way too much stuff here. Like I have accumulated way too much stuff. I've kind of retail therapied a little bit too hard. And so once we got our house decorated, I was like, shoot, what am I supposed to do with all this stuff? And my sister-in-law, my husband's sister, she encouraged me. She was like, hey, you should sell all of your like overstock or whatever on Instagram. She was like, there's this girl, about a town over, about an hour away, who was doing the same thing at the time on Facebook. She had like a Facebook group. And she would buy vintage items, vintage like mid-century pieces, and she would stage them up and sell them in a Facebook group. And like she always sold out of her stuff. So Emma, my sister-in-law, was like, you need to start an Instagram page where you do that. Because I didn't want to do it on Facebook. I've never liked Facebook. I still don't like Facebook to this day, really. And so I was like, okay. At first, I actually was really hesitant to do it because number one, I felt like selling stuff on Instagram was kind of like, I don't know, I felt like it was like embarrassing. I was like, this is going to make it look like I'm like hard up for money, that I'm like desperate. I also don't want this other girl who's reselling to think that I'm like copying her idea. Just there were so many like limiting beliefs in my head about why I didn't want to start this thing and I didn't want to do this thing. But then when I finally was just like, screw it. I'm just going to try it and see what happens. So I can remember our first, if you were like a OG Little Yellow Door fan, we started having Instagram story sales every other Sunday night at 6 o'clock. So Emma actually helped me at the time, and she would help me source items throughout the week. And then we would take pictures of them and we would price them. And we like every other Sunday night, we would like get together in my dining room and we would have like our little notebooks. And, we would have, I think our first sale was like 85 items. and we would drop all the items, and people just like got to where they would know they're having a sale, like they're doing an Insta drop, whatever. And it just became this thing. And this was like, again, 2019. Not many people were doing like these these drops, like I feel like so many vintage resellers these days have drops, but like this was kind of before the drops was a thing. Not many people really knew what that was. And so that's really how it got started. And so every 2 weeks we would do that, and we would ship items out, if they were, gosh bless. I have learned so many things about shipping over the years. I can remember one time I shipped a set of green vintage glassware to Chattanooga to my friend Molly, and I don't even think I wrapped them. I literally don't even think I wrapped them. And I think I sent them in a box to Chattanooga. And I also remember another specific time. This is hilarious. When I first started like making art and like selling watercolor cards and stuff, I also made those like yarn tapestries. Again, your girl was just kind of making whatever she could to get some money in the bank. I can remember being so embarrassed because my husband's ex-girlfriend ordered a tapestry from me. And it was like it literally just had like a rod, and I dyed some string, hung it on there, wrapped it up, and I think I put it in a poly mailer, and I sent it to her. Obviously it snapped and it broke in the mail. And I can remember her messaging me and be like, hey, like this came broken. And like, I was so new to business. I didn't know if I was supposed to like reimburse her, like make a new one, like just, there's so many funny stories like that I could tell you that I've just like I've learned so much over the years just about shipping and all that type of stuff. But anyways, Little Yellow Door was born, and I was also still making art all the time. And so then I'm trying to like figure out what came next. Little Yellow Door went on, and like it technically started, our first sale was in the spring of 2019. And then in November of 2019, I found out I was pregnant with Worth. And y'all, when I tell you that me and Will were definitely the type of like couple, we said, like we are going to be married for 5 years, and then we're going to travel and do all sorts of fun stuff. We're going to live our life. We're going to travel. We're going to like be so fun. And then we'll have kids after we're married for 5 years. That was literally our plan. We actually had a plan to go to Hawaii that next year. So in November of 2019, I find out I'm pregnant with Worth. We were literally married for 4 months and found out I was pregnant. But Little Yellow Door just kept building, and we just kept on doing the dang thing with the sales and everything. But then COVID rolled around in March of 2020, and I was pregnant. And so around that time is when I stopped being doing anything speech, doing anything educationally, because the family that I was helping, obviously the world shut down and like nobody was going to see anybody anymore. And I didn't feel like comfortable going into their house because I was pregnant and all these things. So probably March 2020 is the last time that I was like, yeah, I'm not doing speech ever again. I'm not doing anything in this realm ever again. And so that was sort of when that went down the drain. But so I can remember when I was pregnant, I just was very much in the mindset of what am I going to continue to do for money, because I still want to be able to make money. Little Yellow Door was growing, and like the momentum was there, but I was also pregnant. And so, and I had never been pregnant before. I had never had a baby before. So I didn't know what that was going to look like. I didn't know if that was going to look like me wanting to stay home. I didn't know if that was going to look like me wanting to continue working. Like, I didn't know what that would look like. So I kind of just like left it all open-ended. People really started to ask me, are you going to open a storefront? Are you going to open a storefront? Because our Instagram sales I would almost sell out every single sale. Every other Sunday night, we would almost sell out. And so all this vintage stuff really started to take over our extra bedroom. And again, we only had a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, but now I was pregnant, so we had to turn that into the nursery. And so around that time, my father-in-law came to me and said, hey, we have this building on the east end of town in Huntingdon, our small town, and they owned it, and he was like the people who were using it, who was like a hair salon and maybe like an insurance agency. He was like, they both just moved out. Their contracts were up. They moved out. Do you want to use that building just like as storage so that you can get this junk out of your house and out of, and I was like, yes, that would be perfect. I moved like I think it was while I was still pregnant with Worth. I started to move in to that building on East Main Street. And at first, which eventually became my first store, if you know anything about my journey, that building eventually became my first store. At first, I was just using it for storage. So basically, we would have our Instagram story sales. And then during the week, I would set like hours that people could come there. And instead of doing porch pickup at my house, which eventually got kind of weird, like Will was like, I don't want all these random people picking up stuff from our porch. I don't want that. And so we finally started to use this building. People started to come to pick up their items. But then it's like one thing led to another. And when they would come pick up their items, they'd be like, hey, what else do you have? Like, can I dig around in these boxes of all this stuff that's wrapped up in paper, and can I dig through and see like what else you have? And so then that was the moment that I really started to think like, shoot, maybe I should set this up like a storefront and kind of see where it takes me. And so in the meantime, we had our first baby, we had Worth, and I can remember in his newborn days, like he was born July 28th, and I can remember I tried to be a stay-at-home mom for like a week or 2 weeks, and I immediately was like, I cannot stay in this house. I mean, I've worked my whole life. I've played sports my whole life. I've done stuff my whole life. It was really hard for me to just be like, oh, I had a baby. I'm going to stay home for the foreseeable future. Even though it was COVID and even though we were freaked out about the world, I was like, I cannot do this. So I think the first time I ever took Worth out into the world, like as a COVID baby, he was 6 weeks old, and I took him to an estate sale. And I can remember so many people like gave me flack for that. Like they were like, don't get that baby sick. Don't, everybody has all their opinions when you have a newborn baby. But anyway, I took him to an estate sale when he was 6 weeks old. And I can remember like during like August, September, October, when he was a couple months old, I would go up to that little building on East Main Street, and I would just tinker around and play around, and I would unpack boxes, and I would lay out rugs, and I would hang basket walls on the wall and just play in that building. And then eventually my father-in-law was like, if you want to rent it, like if you want to do some cosmetic updates to that building, like you can do that. He was like, you can pay for the cosmetic updates, but then we won't obviously charge you for any sort of rent. We won't make you pay utilities. So it was really, honestly, a really good gig. So I paid, for the walls to be painted stark white, and he actually let me paint the outside of the building white, which I didn't think he was going to let me do for a really long time. And so obviously at this point, people start asking me, are you gonna open a storefront? Like, do you have a storefront? Like, oh, we drove by and we saw the baskets hanging on the wall. What are you opening? And I'm like, nothing. I'm not opening anything. Like, I have a baby. This is just my Instagram store. You know what I mean? Like, again, I live in a small town. People are like, what is this girl doing? Why does she have this building if she doesn't have a business, right? And that kind of leads into the whole conversation of, if you have an online business and you don't have a storefront yet, man, I could do a whole episode on that whole conversation. But so many people think that they have to have a physical storefront in order to be quote unquote legit. You feel like you don't have a real job unless you have the storefront, right? Which can be so frustrating. And you also feel like people don't really take you seriously unless you have the real storefront, And so around this time, people just started to be like, when are you opening a storefront? What are you going to do? We would love to come shop in person. And so I kind of just listened to that, and, all along the way and all along this journey of starting Little Yellow Door, I just kind of did the next best step that made the most sense at the time, right? So I moved into the store, we kind of painted the store, I set it all up, and then I decided that I wanted it to be open 2 days a week. I was like, okay, I will open up the storefront on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, but I do not want this to take away from me being a mom, because my baby was breastfeeding. I had no plans of him going to daycare or anything like that. And so I was like, I will open this, but I do not want it to take away from me being a mother. That like being a mom was always like my North Star, right? Like I was like, this is just not going to take away from that aspect of my life. Because again, I was coming off of like, I might be a stay-at-home mom. And when I decided I didn't want to be a stay-at-home mom, then that's when I was like, okay, but if I'm going to do this, I'm not going to allow it to take away from me being a mom. So anyway, I end up opening the storefront in May of 2021. Worth wasn't even a year old yet. He would have turned a year in July of 2021. So we opened up the storefront in May of 2021. We had like a soft opening and then we had a grand opening. And then I figured out that I really liked having like local vendors come and set up. I loved like supporting other local small businesses. And so I would have vendors come and set up in my little tiny back room of that store. And then I think I eventually started being open Tuesday, Wednesday, and one Saturday a month, because people would always be like, well, why aren't you open Saturdays? You're an antique store. Why are you not open Saturdays? Why are you not open Saturdays? So but again, if you can see a pattern here, I really started to again fall into that trap of like, oh, I'm just going to listen to what other people want for me. And I'm not necessarily going to like listen to what Paige wants. And I'm not going to listen to what Paige needs. And so I slowly started to creep back into that old habit of like, people want me to open a store, so I guess I'm going to open a store. Oh, people want me to be open on Saturday, so I'll open on Saturday, right? But obviously, if you're a business, I mean, you should be open on Saturdays. All these things started creeping into my head. But again, I wanted to be a mom at the same time. And so that store sort of, I don't remember exactly when. I want to say it was the next summer. So we opened May of 2021, and that store was fun. I was having a blast. The momentum was there. And then in the summer of 2022, June of 2022, sorry, I'm like trying to keep all these dates straight. Again, I try to stay chronological so that I don't get out of order. But there was a building that I had always been obsessed with. I had, ever since I had stepped foot in Huntington, Tennessee, there was this one building that I had always been in love with. It used to be, and it's obviously the store that I'm in now. It used to be called Pete's Body Shop. So it was an old abandoned auto body shop, and there was an old antique store across the street from it called Jordan's Trading Post. And when I would go picking and like, shopping in that antique store, I would always like kind of pry and ask. Again, it was abandoned, and so I'd be like, hey, what's the story with this building across the street? Who owns it? It was such a cool building. It was white, and they had these huge sliding doors, and there was like ivy growing all over it. And it also had that really cool like 50s Coca-Cola sign. And it said Pete's Body Shop, and it had like Coca-Cola on either end of the sign. Oh my gosh, it was so cool. But I can just remember always asking Mr. Jordan and being like, who owns this building? What's the story? Do you think we can buy it? And he would always be like, no, absolutely not. Like, they will never sell it. It's been in their family. It's been in these people's family for so many years. They'll never sell it. So eventually my husband contacted the owner of Pete's Body Shop, and we asked them if we could buy it. And he said no, just respectfully said no. Like, he said it belonged to my dad. And his dad had passed away, and he was like, it's a really like sentimental building for us. We're just not ready to let it go. Even though it was sitting there and nobody was doing anything with it and it was kind of abandoned, he was like, we're just not ready to let it go. And so basically my husband told him, like, if you ever feel like you want to sell it, please contact us first. So in June of 2022, we went to a birthday party, and they told me at the birthday party, hey, I think we're ready to sell Pete's Body Shop. And I was like, oh my God. Like, I can remember running to Will and being like, I think they're gonna sell. And like in my mind, immediately, I was like, it's ours. I don't care if it costs $1 million. Like it's like a cinder block building, probably built in like the 30s. I'm like, I don't care. It's ours. And so Will was like, slow your roll. First off, we don't know how much it costs. We don't know the shape of the building. And I was like, no. Like, I don't care the shape of the building. I don't care if it's dilapidated. I don't care. Like, this building is ours. Like, I could just see it. And so we got the keys that week and we went to look at it. And yeah, it was like, I want to say the rest was history, but it wasn't. There was a lot of back and forth, like with the pricing and all that stuff. But long story short, we obviously ended up buying the building and we renovated it. Oh man, now this leads into like the year of the renovations. And so I'm still running my store on East Main Street. It's a small store. There's a lot of really small rooms. It's not super conducive for shopping. It's not super conducive for large furniture. Like there was also things about that building that I didn't love. I also didn't own it. So like, even though my father-in-law owned it, there was still things that I wasn't in control over because it did not belong to me and Will. And so, after praying about it and just we decided that buying Pete's Body Shop would be what would be best for the store if I was going to continue to do the store. So we buy the building, we start renovating it, and around that time we also bought this house that we live in right now, which is a 1974 ranch style house, and it was a fixer-upper. So in 2022, we decided that we were going to buy a store and renovate it and buy a house and renovate it. And granted, I was also doing like design projects for clients on the side. I was also still sort of doing like markets and pop-up events for art. I was still doing so many things in my business. And then all of a sudden we're going to toss in, we're going to also renovate a house, and we're also going to renovate a store. And we're also going to get pregnant with our second baby during that time. So 2022, 2023 was a very chaotic year to say the least. But like once we got the store renovated, I really like went all in. Like when I say all in on the store, it was like all I thought about. It was all I dreamed about. It was all I did. I was eating, sleeping, breathing the store and breathing the house renovation. Like, and even though I was like pregnant and like about to have a baby, but I did, when I was pregnant with Lake, who is our second baby, I did step back from a lot of my design projects that I was doing for other clients because like I got to a point where I realized, I can't do it all. I can't do design projects for other people while also keeping myself afloat, while also making all these decisions. I mean, literally in the year of 2022, 2023, I was on the phone with a contractor. I was texting a contractor every second of every day because we had two projects going on at once. And it was so chaotic, and I had a baby. It was a crazy year. So once we finally moved into the big store, which is the store that we have now, one side, if you know anything about the storefront now, Little Yellow Door functions as an event space. So we have an event space on one side, which is called the garage at Little Yellow Door. So we rent that out for baby showers, birthday parties. I also teach paint classes in there. It's just like a multifunctional space. And then we also have the retail side of the store. And it's a really, really, really big space to keep filled, if I'm being honest. And so we move in there in February of 2024. And again, I'm like, okay, I have this building now that's closer to downtown. So therefore I need to be open more hours during the week. So I started being open Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and every single Saturday. So I was open Tuesday through Saturday, and I also took my baby to work with me. Like, I would just strap him up in my little ring sling and we would go to work. And that's what we did until Lake was 19 months old. And, all throughout all of this, it's crazy to look back on like the stuff that we've built and the business that I have and think that I did a lot of it with a baby attached to me, also a baby nursing. I've been nursing since July 2020. I'm not nursing right now because I just weaned 3 months ago because I'm pregnant right now. But like essentially I have been breastfeeding, pregnant or breastfeeding since November of 2019. So building all of this with babies attached to me, Worth has been like in and out of daycare here and there. He's also like, my mother-in-law has also helped a lot with childcare. I can do a whole other episode sometime about like childcare and piecing together when people can help and when they can't and all that sort of thing. But anyway, so we opened this storefront. Baby comes to work with me. And also during that year, I opened up design services again. So after I had gotten comfortable and like we had sort of, the house renovation started to wind down, the store renovation started to wind down, then I started taking on a couple more design clients again. And, you know, this is all just like sort of getting you all up to speed on where I'm at right now. So this is all sort of an origin story of how Little Yellow Door started, how it's grown, how it's evolved, and, you know, just the steps along the way of how I've done it with babies at the same time. But, you know, I look back at year 2022 and 2023 and I'm like, dang, like I was a workhorse. I was back in my workhorse grind era, and I think it was really starting to make me sick. Like I know that in the fall of last year, I got sick. In the winter of last year, I got sick several times, and it forced me to slow down a lot. And then in February of this year, so February 2025, I found out I was pregnant with our third baby. And man, when I tell you that this third baby has been a doozy, like it's been a doozy. Things have not been easy since the very first day. And, you know, a lot of people say that when you have a third baby, it forces you to slow down. And that has been the case so far with this child. And it will probably maybe continue to be the case in the future. And so I've made some changes to the storefront hours. We are now back to being open only on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Sorry, on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. So we went from being Tuesday through Saturday during my workhorse year where I just like grinded to the bone and then I made myself sick. And now we are only open Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And it's worked out a lot better just because, again, motherhood has always been my North Star. Being a mom and just, you know, being balanced with this family has always been my North Star. Now, I will say both of my boys are in daycare right now. Like, I don't ever want to sit here and act like I stay home with my boys all the time and I also have this store. Like, I don't want to ever sit here and act like I do it all, because my boys do go to daycare. However, they never go 5 days a week. I mean, I feel like this week, Monday, they had a doctor's appointment, like a well child visit. So I didn't take them until in the afternoon. And then tomorrow they have dentist appointments in the morning. And so they won't go until the afternoon. And I feel like there's been so many weeks here recently, like where they've been sick. So they've just stayed with me, or like we've gone out of town. So they've just stayed with me. So it's like we have daycare really to just kind of have an option of like where to take them. You know, if I have work or I need to be at the store, or now I'm recording this podcast, like this is a project that I'm working on now, but I don't ever want to sit here and act like we don't have daycare, because we do have daycare now, but most of the time my kids don't even begin daycare until they're like 18, 19 months old because of breastfeeding and all sorts of stuff like that. But anyway, I'm kind of rambling and I can talk about all of that in future episodes. But I really just wanted to get you guys caught up and up to speed about how Little Yellow Door started. Yes, I do still paint here and there. So I feel like when I first quit being a speech therapist, my vision for my life was to like be a full-time artist. And I've really kind of over the years figured out that art to me is more of like an outlet. And I don't want art to feel like it's something that is mandatory. I don't want it to feel like something that's forced. I don't want it to feel like something that I have to do. Art is sort of an escape for me. So I don't take commissions. I did commissions for a long time, like when I first stopped being a speech therapist, because, you know, I needed money. But I don't take commissions anymore. That is something that I always like have joked and told Will. I'm like, if all else fails, like I know that I can fall back on art, you know? And that is one thing that's kind of funny to me with speech pathology is so many people say like, well, hey, at least you still have that you can, at least you still have speech, your degree and everything that you can fall back on if you decide you want to be a speech therapist again. And I'm like, yeah, no, I first off, I don't have my license anymore. I gave that up a couple years after not using it because I don't know if you know a speech therapist or you are a speech pathologist or whatever, like the dues and the fees every year are so expensive. And finally, like after a couple years of paying my ASHA dues and like having to do continuing education classes and all that stuff at the end of year, also I was always the person who was doing my CEUs, your continuing ed hours. I was also the person doing those like on December 28th, December 29th, because you have to have them before the end of the year. And that was always me. Like I was the one doing them at the very last minute and like not listening to them and just clicking through whatever. Like, and so finally Will got to a point where he was like, what are we doing? Like, why are we paying this much money every year for something that you're not using? And like, he finally just like looked me in the eye one day and he was like, are you ever going to use this again? Like, be honest. And I was like, no, I would rather go work in a dusty, questionable, dirty antique store for the rest of my life than go back to being a speech pathologist. And that's just me. I'm not saying that that's everyone's journey. That's just my personal opinion. So I gave up my license. And so, when a lot of people these days say, oh yeah, you can always go back to that. I'm like, no, like we've burned the boats. Like with that, it's actually not an option for me. It's either art or it's Little Yellow Door. It's selling vintage. Like that is what I have been focused on for all these years. And back to this whole third baby thing, I feel like I have been cracked in half. My plans for the future, my ideas for the future, everything has been sort of not like gone up in smoke during this pregnancy, but my ideas for my business and just sort of the trajectory and the direction that my business is headed has really shifted a lot during this pregnancy. And I'm really starting to think a lot about the future and like what things are going to look like with 3 kids. And I'm also just starting to really learn how to work smarter and not harder, because as most people know, buying furniture and selling furniture is a really, really time consuming physical labor type of business. And I'm not saying that I'm not going to do it anymore. It's definitely in my foreseeable future for now. But that leads me to what episode 3 is going to be about. So this pregnancy has been full of a lot of crazy things, and I'm going to get into that in the next episode. I'm going to tell y'all all about how like I had a negative pregnancy test at first, and then I had several ER visits, and there's a lot that I'm going to get into and share with you all about my health journey this pregnancy, but also some dreams. I have been having crazy dreams. I know a lot of people have crazy dreams during pregnancy, but I have had some almost like prophetic dreams this pregnancy, like with straight up voices being like, this is what you are meant to do. This is not what you're meant to do. And I don't know if these voices are coming from God. I don't know if they're coming from the devil. I don't know if they're coming from angels. I don't know if it's coming from my brother. I don't know who these voices are coming from, but I'm going to have to tell y'all about them, and I'm going to tell y'all all about them in the next episode. And I promise you all, these episodes are not always just going to be like me dumping my story. All of this has a place. All of this is part of the journey. All of this is part of this bigger picture that I'm building for you all. And again, I just had to lay the foundation of what's gone on in my life in order for you to understand this podcast, and in order for you to understand this show, you really have to understand where I'm coming from, the jobs I've had, the business that I've built now, and so that you can understand kind of where it's going. And anyway, I think that's all for today. I think I've covered everything. And I really hope to see you in episode number 3. I hope again that you all keep listening to this. I have been told for years that I need to start a podcast, and this is kind of a teaser. I recorded my first episode of this podcast when I was pregnant with Lake, who is my second baby. So I recorded an episode for this hypothetical podcast literally when I was pregnant with Lake, which was like 3 years ago. Okay. And eventually I will actually share that voice. It was like literally a recorded voice memo on my phone. And that's how long this idea for this podcast has been in my brain. Like, I'm pregnant with our third kid, and I recorded the first episode, or like a hypothetical episode for this hypothetical podcast 3 years ago. And so anyway, I'm finally sitting here. I'm finally doing it. We're finally here. And so I just hope that you continue to listen and share it with a friend if this is something, this type of work of like, oh, I have this job. I don't really like it anymore. How can I transition out of it? How am I going to make money? You know, is using your creativity to make money even worth it in 2025? You know, should I just keep my 9-to-5 job? You know, just all of this sort of rumination and this topic is what this show is all about. So I hope to continue to pour into you all. Like I said, at the time of recording this, it is September 9th. And so I'm still hoping to get a couple more episodes underneath my belt so that I can just kind of release a bunch at once so that you all can kind of binge listen so that you can understand and know where we're going. Okay, I love you guys. I'm rambling. I just don't want to get off the mic. This is so fun. Again, this is so new to me. I'm getting used to the microphone, but this is fun, and I will see you guys in the next episode.